Wolverhampton Wanderers, known almost everywhere simply as Wolves, are one of English football's most historically important clubs. Based in Wolverhampton in the West Midlands, the club's story stretches from the birth of league football to modern battles for promotion, survival, and European relevance. Wolves are not just another old club with a long timeline. They helped shape the structure of English football, became champions during one of the sport's most transformative eras, nearly disappeared during a financial crisis, and then fought their way back through the divisions. Their identity is instantly recognizable: old gold shirts, black shorts, the Wolf's head badge, and Molineux Stadium, their home since 1889. To understand Wolves is to understand a club that has repeatedly risen, fallen, and reinvented itself across nearly 150 years. The club began in 1877 as St. Luke's F.C., founded through a school and church community before adopting the name Wolverhampton Wanderers 2 years later. This was a very different football world. Regional clubs were still forming identities, rules were still becoming standardized, and the idea of a national league was only beginning to take shape. Wolves quickly became part of that new footballing order. In 1888, they were one of the founding members of the Football League, placing them at the center of a revolution in organized sport. The Football League created regular fixtures, a competitive table, and a national framework that would influence football around the world. Wolves were not merely participants in early English football, they were part of the foundation on which the modern game was built. Molineux Stadium became Wolves' home in 1889, and over time it became one of the symbolic grounds of English football. Moving from Dudley Road to Molineux gave the club a permanent stage on which to grow its reputation. Stadiums matter in football because they become more than buildings, they hold memory, atmosphere, rivalries, and identity. At Molineux, Wolves developed the visual language that still defines them today. Their old gold and black kit became one of the most distinctive color combinations in the game. Since 1979, the club has also used its famous wolf's head logo, a sharp and modern symbol that connects directly to the nickname. The result is a brand that feels both historic and unmistakably unique. Wolves found early success in cup football, winning the FA Cup for the first time in 1893. That mattered because the FA Cup was the most prestigious competition of the era, often carrying even greater emotional weight than the league. But Wolves' early history was not a straight climb upward. After relegation, they produced one of the great surprises of early English football by winning the FA Cup again in 1908 while playing as a second-division side. That victory showed a theme that would repeat throughout their history. Wolves often performed their most memorable acts of defiance when circumstances looked difficult. They were capable of setbacks, but they were also capable of using those setbacks as a platform for something unexpected. The years between the world wars brought instability, rebuilding, and eventual recovery. Wolves fell as low as the third tier in 1923, a major drop for a club with their founding member status and cup-winning past. Yet they responded quickly, winning the Third Division North in 1923-24 and later taking the Second Division title in 1931-32. These promotions re-established the club's competitive standing and set the stage for greater achievements. This period is important because it shows Wolves developing the resilience that would become a defining part of their history. The club had already experienced glory and decline, but it learned how to climb again. That ability to rebuild after a fall became one of the clearest patterns in the Wolves story. The golden age of Wolverhampton Wanderers came under manager Stan Cullis. During the 1950s, Wolves became one of the strongest teams in England, winning the league championship 3 times, in 1953-54, 1957-58, and 1958-59. This was the club at its peak, competing with confidence, intensity, and a reputation for physical power and attacking purpose. Cullis had been connected to Wolves as both player and manager, and he helped create a team that reflected the toughness of the region around it. Wolves also won the FA Cup in 1949 and again in 1960, giving the club a remarkable post-war record. For a generation of supporters, this era established Wolves as true giants of English football, not just historic participants. Wolves' influence in the 1950s extended beyond domestic football. In 1953, they became one of the first British clubs to install floodlights at their home ground, opening the door to high-profile evening matches. These floodlit friendlies against leading foreign teams were not ordinary exhibitions. They were events, watched with fascination and often televised, at a time when international club competition was still limited. The most famous of these was against Honvéd, the Hungarian side connected to one of the greatest footballing nations of the era. Matches like these helped create momentum for the launch of the European Cup in 1955, the competition now known as the UEFA Champions League. Wolves helped prove that club football could be a continental spectacle. After the peak of the 1950s, Wolves remained an important club but entered a more uneven period. They were relegated in 1965 after 26 consecutive seasons in the top flight, ending a long era of elite stability. Promotion back to the First Division came in 1966-67, and the club continued to collect major honors in later years. Wolves won the League Cup in 1974 and again in 1980, proving they could still rise for major occasions. They also won the Second Division title in 1976-77. In Europe, Wolves reached the quarter-finals of the European Cup in 1959-60, the semi-finals of the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1960-61, and the first UEFA Cup final in 1972. The club's reputation remained international. The early 1980s brought one of the darkest chapters in Wolves' history. A financial crisis, intensified by the wider economic recession, pushed the club close to liquidation in 1982. For supporters, this was not just about poor results, it was about the possible loss of an institution that had existed since the Victorian era. On the pitch, the collapse was dramatic. Between 1981-82 and 1985-86, Wolves were relegated 4 times, with only one promotion interrupting the fall. The club eventually landed in the 4th Division, the first and so far only time it has fallen to that level. For a club that had been English champion 3 times, the drop was almost unimaginable, but it became part of the mythology of survival. The turnaround came quickly and powerfully. After losing the inaugural Football League playoff final in 1987, Wolves responded by winning the 4th Division title and the Football League trophy in 1987-88. The following season, they won the 3rd Division title in 1988-89. In only a short span, the club moved from near oblivion to upward momentum. This recovery was vital because it restored belief at Molineux. Supporters who had watched the club sink through the divisions now saw a team with direction again. It also reinforced the idea that Wolves' history is not only about trophies at the top. It is about endurance, community loyalty, and the emotional force of a club refusing to disappear when logic suggested it might. From 1989 to 2003, Wolves spent 14 seasons in the second tier, chasing a return to the top level of English football. That period overlapped with the creation of the Premier League in 1992, which changed the economics and visibility of the game. Promotion now meant access not only to elite competition, but to a new financial universe. Wolves finally reached the Premier League through the 2003 playoffs, but the stay lasted only 1 season. They returned again after winning the championship in 2008-09, only to suffer relegation in 2011-12 and then another drop into League One in 2012-13. Once again, the club had to rebuild from a lower level after tasting the top flight. The modern revival of Wolves began with another climb through the divisions. They won the League One title in 2013-14, then captured the championship title in 2017-18 to return to the Premier League with renewed ambition. Since 2016, the club has been owned by the Chinese conglomerate Fosun International, a change that brought new investment and a more global outlook. Wolves also returned to European competition after a 39-year absence, reaching the UEFA Europa League finals stage in 2020. Their rivalries, especially the Black Country Derby with West Bromwich Albion, remain central to the club's emotional identity, alongside tensions with other West Midlands clubs like Aston Villa, Stoke City, and Birmingham City. Wolves' story is ultimately one of heritage, collapse, recovery, and constant reinvention. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.